Normally when I do speaking at these events, I really try to concentrate on big themes and trends and stuff like that. And I eventually wind my way to, best practices and things like that. This is a little bit different. I actually presented a similar presentation to a group called the IPN, the International Printers Network, which is a bunch of PSPs from around the world to get together. And we were talking about workflow, specifically bottlenecks, things that affect their profitability, things that affect their productivity and whatnot. And what it came down to is that job onboarding was their biggest issue. All these printers from around the globe basically identified the same issue. We have trouble when we get files from the outside, from our clients, we have trouble getting them into production. We have trouble getting them done right. We have trouble with the data. We have trouble with the files. We have trouble. And we have systems that are supposed to deal with this stuff. What is the problem? And so when I did this presentation, it was actually more of a workshop. And so I'll start out with some of those slides today, but we want to talk about getting smart about job onboarding and see if we can apply automation to what turns out to be probably the biggest bottleneck that most print service providers and most large implants have. Part of it's control. So, my question to you all is job onboarding slowing you down? Does job onboarding impact revenue and profits? Ever consider automation at the front end? And lastly, why should I even care about this? I'm not in the front end. I'm not in customer service. Why should I care? So that's my agenda. And we'll start out with some questions that I asked the IPN guys and some questions that we've asked a lot of PSPs and implants when we're assessing their operations, when they've come to us and said, we need some help to do something. Can you come in and help us figure out what's going on? So, what percentage of your clients submit jobs in a consistent format? Departments or external companies? I'm serious. 50%? 60%? Are your salespeople helping you out? Saying, hey, we're glad to sign this contract. Now, when you're submitting work, this is how we'd like for you to do it. Do they do that? Of course not. How many resources do you happen to have at the front end trying to figure out how to get these jobs into production? You're laughing. More than 2? More than 200? A lot. This literally is a drain. Sometimes 15 or 20% of a workforce is scrambling around trying to figure out how to make jobs, the square peg, fit into the round hole, which is their workflow. And they're pounding it to fit, right? I see smiles, I see head shaking. This is reality. How long does it take you to onboard a single application? Everyone we talk to, almost universally, is wrong. They'll give an answer, on average, a couple of hours. And then you talk to the people that are doing it. It's 8 hours, it's 10 hours, sometimes longer. It all depends where it breaks. Do you charge your clients for additional onboarding efforts? One of the things that we've found universally is that's not the case. You get a quote, then you get this file that looks like it's the spawn of Satan coming through a PDF that was created, back in the Stone Age. And they don't go back to the client and say, hey, we can't fix this and run it efficiently. You've got to give it to us in a different format, a little bit better format, or we're going to have to charge you extra. Does anyone do that? Do you go back to your client for some help? If you're inside, do you go back to the departments and say, this BS is not happening? you've got to fix this file before we can work with it. How do shorter job lengths impact you when you're running jobs? Is that affecting how you onboard? Is that a factor at all? And have you lost any business because you couldn't meet the turnaround requirements that a client had in terms of expectations because their files were so bad coming in and you had trouble onboarding them? Do you experience production delays due to onboarding errors? This seems to be a consistent theme in a lot of print service providers. How do you ensure jobs are configured to optimize production, print, and finishing? One of the things that we've noticed is some of the best agencies in the world that turn around really beautiful direct mail campaigns and onserts and marketing messaging don't know beans about how things print on a press. They've got bleeds out the wazoo. They've got these beautiful high-res images they're going to print on a 600 DPI printer. You have all sorts of crazy things that are going on. Do you have difficulties managing and maintaining multiple print files across shared sites? I mean, you could probably come up with 1,000 other questions on your own. These are the ones that we concentrated on in our workshop. And universally, everyone was screaming uncle. It's like you're describing aspects of my site. You're describing aspects of my in-plant. You know, when you've got 30 million to 50 million credit card customers, and you're cranking out, you know, 500 million pages a month. Onboarding jobs is important. If you're doing things for affiliates and they give you stuff that doesn't work, what are you going to do? You can't afford to miss your SLAs. They can't afford to have stuff go out late in the mail. It's a dilemma. It's a huge dilemma. Well, interestingly enough, research sort of bears things out. This stuff came from a study that was done in 2018 by In-Plant Graphics. And basically what they did is they asked PSPs and they asked implants, large implants, what their biggest headaches were. 49% said managing shorter print runs. 35% said document prep. Is document prep part of onboarding? I'd think so. Customizing the workflow to meet our needs, managing many workflows, reducing job turnaround. What's a big impact on job turnaround? How much time it takes to get up front? How do you figure out what needs to be done to manipulate a job and optimize it for your workflows? Working with legacy software systems is more of an implant issue than a PSP issue. And connecting islands of automation, integration. Integration is automation's best friend, I think. Regardless, what we've found, what hopefully you are experiencing, is that job onboarding remains one of the top workflow bottlenecks for PSPs especially. We've also found that there's a codicil to that, and that's that modifying jobs is also a challenge. Modifying jobs is also a challenge. What happens when you need to make a universal change across 2,500 jobs? How often does that happen? You acquire someone. You merge with someone. All of a sudden, you've got a new inkjet printer. You've got to change all your barcodes and finishing stuff. I mean, there are tons of things that happen. You know. Also, migrations impact your ability when you are modifying jobs. So when you're migrating to a new Production print solution, you plug something else into your workflow. Kemal, that was a great slide, your complex workflow slide. I've got one in another presentation that I use that basically says, statistically, the average print shop has between 40 and 100 point solutions doing various pieces of the workflow. And most of them don't talk to each other. So just with that environment, how in the hell do you onboard a job and use automation to make that process work? Integration is your friend. Automation is integration's best friend. Okay. Does anybody disagree with what we're saying here? Are you experiencing it? Hopefully you'll have some answers that you can inform us of. I'm going to tell you about a study that we did earlier this year for a large European print service provider. And by large by European standards. About 25 million in turnover in euros is how big they are. They do a mix of transactional and direct mail type of campaigns. They have Quadient as their major composition system. They have invested in inkjet printers. They have a bunch of cut sheet printers of various types. They're looking at getting into wide format. They basically do everything. And for the most part, they have a really, really loyal customer base. But they were recently acquired or sold, and the people that bought the company realize that's hemorrhaging money. What looked like a really, really good, strong business with a great client base, a lot of turnover, turns out that it's not very profitable. So it was like, come in, assess us, help us figure out what needs to be done. And we were in a state of shock because we know that they got a print MIS system. We know that they have some homegrown workflow stuff that they built themselves. They have probably 20 programmers in their IT staff. Really a crackerjack group. And we were shocked because when we started looking at things, they weren't very efficient. Their salespeople weren't very disciplined. They weren't helping them out, the production people out at all. They weren't profitable. They didn't have their arms around the costs of doing business really very well. They thought that any revenue was good revenue, which a lot of PSPs think is the thing. And so we made some recommendations to them relative to how they could fix what was going on. And one of the biggest areas for an immediate impact on cash flow and also on profitability and productivity revolved around onboarding jobs. We asked them how long it took to onboard jobs. You talk to the C-level management, they were saying, probably half hour, 45 minutes. We build into the quotes about 2 hours of onboarding, but that's plenty of time. When we actually took a look over a 3-day period, they were averaging 8 to 10 hours. It says 6 to 8 up there, but that was a mistype on my part when I built this slide. 6 to 8 hours versus 2 hours. They never went back, ever went back to their customers to make up that. They just decided that they would eat that extra time. So number one, it took them longer to figure it out, longer to get it into production. But they were losing those hours. It's just going out the window, just going out the window. And most of the time, in that extra 6 to 8 hours, it wasn't just the people who were onboarding the jobs, getting them ready to go into production, that were being impacted. They had to go to IT, saying, please help me figure this out. This file has to run and it won't run. I'm not talking pre-press onboarding problems, flattening images and stuff like that, right? It's like this file won't work. This file won't work.
Why the disconnect between what management was seeing
Well, management turned over. They had recently been acquired, and so the new management was trying to get their arms around what they had. And basically, they trusted that the people who had been working at this place for 15 to 20 years knew what in the hell they were doing. And the reality is, the operators know what they're doing. The IT people know what they're doing. The MIS people that manage their print MIS system, they know what they're doing. It just wasn't coordinated. Things weren't tied together. You know, the sales force itself was not disciplined. They would not help customers do the right things to bring work in that was print ready. I mean, if somebody submits a print ready file to you, is it print ready? How often? If it's a PDF, we all know that the PDFs are not created equal. You know, that the universal format, right? PDFs are not created equal. We sell so much stuff to optimize PDFs, it's not even funny. But, you know, the salespeople wouldn't help them out. What none of them realized is that based on the printers they had, based on the finishing equipment and fulfillment stuff that they had, based on the software that they had, they needed to basically create a generic workflow and normalize everything to run on that workflow, regardless of what they got. Wasn't a big deal when they did mostly transactional because, as Kimmel pointed out, they're getting raw data from their customers. They're running it through Quadient. They control the quality of the output. And of course, the output runs great when you control the vertical and the horizontal, right? When you're getting print-ready files from your agencies, your clients' agencies, you know, it's a crapshoot. And unless your salespeople are somewhat disciplined, your onboarding managers, your front house people are somewhat disciplined in how they do things, and you understand the power of having a standard workflow, you're going to run into scenarios like this. All right, so these are some of the things that they ran into. They had SLA problems. They had resource demands that they couldn't handle. They had a lot of rework. Up to 15% of their production on jobs that came from the outside had to be reworked. Talk about a drain on your profits. Talk about a drain on your profits. I mean, basically, everything bad that could happen manifested in the 3 days that we did this study with them. And we made recommendations to them that weren't necessarily about buying software. We're a software company. We love to sell software and services. It's like, guys, understand what you have, map out what you have, train your salespeople to look for profitable business, and help your customers help you by giving you stuff that is more ready to be run. We're working towards that with them. Hopefully we'll sell some software along the way as well. But the bottom line is job onboarding was killing them, absolutely killing them. So we go through this with a lot of companies. It doesn't matter whether it's in-plant or print service providers. There are partners of ours, Bluecrest, Pitney Bowes, Canon, that generate tons and tons of services revenues by doing scripting to fix stuff so it'll run through the workflows. All right. We asked the question of our services guys who generate a lot of money helping people script so they can apply a little bit of automation and logic to onboarding. Can we automate at all the onboarding process? Can we come up with a solution that takes a look at the files that's coming in, decides, oh, this is that kind of file, whatever that kind of file is, and automatically build the parameters that will allow that job to be optimized to run in a standardized workflow? The answer was yes. You know, we just announced this at Print. Normally, I don't spend a lot of time talking about specific products, but this seemed to be an appropriate thing. Basically, we wanted to provide automated software, or guided automated software, that would enable companies to quickly onboard jobs. All right, so the idea was to reduce the time and effort it took, to provide some flexibility, you know, obviously pull some cycles out of the process up front, you know, and help people be more profitable, because this is still one of the most manual processes of the entire print workflow, print production workflow. Basically, we want to take a look at the data, figure out from the data what it is, extract relevant information about the data contained in the files, store that in a database, and use that as a means of comparing to other jobs coming in. We want to eliminate scripting as much as possible. We do a lot of scripting. You know, and sometimes you'll end up with a script that's 4,500 lines long to condition data, to get it to the point where it can go into a workflow. And it doesn't matter whose workflow it is. It could be Prisma. You know, it could be an RPD workflow. It doesn't really matter what the backbone is. The important part is getting the files in shape so they can run through whatever the generic backbone is. I mean, let's face it, even in a mixed shop where you have all sorts of different types of printers, those printers are optimized to work in a certain way. If it's Xerox, who knows, you may still be running Metacode, I hope not, but you know, it could be PDF. It could be VIPP. With Canon, Ricoh, it's probably AFP. It could be PDF. A lot of the high-speed HPs are optimized to run with PDF. So you know what you need to feed the beasts based on the finishing equipment you've got, the inserters you've got, whether they're Bell & Howell, whether they're Pitney Bowes, it doesn't really matter, or Bluecrest. There are specific control files and formats that you have to use to make them run the way that they're supposed to run. Doesn't it make sense to figure out, I have a printer that's going to feed this finishing workflow, this physical workflow. Why don't I pound all the jobs that are going to fit into that workflow, optimize for that workflow? So the concept of smart setup is to automate that. And it can be done. So, representative use cases, probably useful to understand. Enterprises that have multiple composition systems that want to outsource all the print and finishing to a PSP. There's a case study that I'll show you later on in this presentation that literally is exactly that workflow. 46 lines of business, 5 different document composition systems, 4 different print centers around the United States. Consolidate to one, outsource all the print and fulfillment to a PSP, large PSP, but maintain composition inside. Print service providers onboarding customer provided formatted print files, translated mostly PDFs, I'm sure, that are really crappy. Technical term, won't run. Crappy equals won't run. Files are not delivered in a standard format. You have production challenges. This happens internally in implants as well. Department A has their little system. generates PDFs. They hire an agency. They're generating beautiful stuff for campaigns. It comes to the print shop and can't be printed. Print service providers processing transactional print jobs need to optimize the print streams to ensure jobs can run on existing print and fulfillment systems. So, I'm getting stuff from my client who used to print to Xerox Metacode printers. All their existing legacy systems create Metacode. They're giving it to me. All my printers are PDF printers. What's a person to do? I'm sure you could come up with other scenarios rather than these, but these are very common scenarios in this world. Very common scenarios. Chubb spent a whole bunch of time, once they were acquired by ACE, merging those jobs, beating those mainframe-generated AFP jobs into shape where they could be printed and outsourced, correct? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I didn't mention it because I know you were going to talk about onboarding is one of the big issues and outsourcing because people fear it.
Sure, absolutely, positively. Absolutely, positively. And this is the first place where the client really comes together with the print service provider, and this is a huge opportunity to fail. This is a huge opportunity to fail. In some respects, it's almost like parents establishing ground rules for their teenagers when they start driving the car. This is what I expect. And hopefully they do that. A lot of salespeople for print service providers don't do that. Ah, sure. Just give us the files. I'm sure they'll work fine. And the next thing you know, operations is doing a dance, customer service is doing a dance, the sales guy is doing a dance as he's pointing at all these people that are dancing, saying, they screwed up. And all they had to do was specify, you know, this way things will work a lot better. So, how does intelligent automated onboarding work? It's pretty simple, really. You go into the files, you take a look at the files, and there are two pieces of the puzzle. One is actually profile jobs. What format is it? AFP, PDF, whatever it happens to be. What are the page boundaries? Where are the address blocks? Where are the sequence numbers? Where are all the elements on the page? What are the barcodes? All that information gets extracted, literally extracted, and stored in a NoSQL database. So all your parameters are there. There's a guided process that asks questions so somebody can quickly and visually go through this to help answer the questions. You can actually configure and add to your questions based on your environment, but the whole idea is to understand what a file is and create a profile of that file. So the next time I see a file that comes in and I analyze it and it's similar to what I have in my NoSQL database, I go, aha! That file's similar. These parameters will work to make that job work. It's kind of simple in thinking about it. It's kind of counterintuitive because those of us that build templates to run jobs or have ever done that know what a pain in the ass it is to do so. But beyond that, once you build them, that file and that template are tied together forever. Hopefully you don't ever want to have to change it, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then over time, if you're an Allstate or a Prudential or a Unum, something like that, or a Wells Fargo, you have 12,000 different templates. generated by multiple different composition systems or post-composition systems. And you probably have 2 or 3 people managing the revisions on those. But ready to blow their brains out any time somebody brings them a change. In the world we're talking about, all the parameters, all the variations of all the jobs that you run live in this database. What it amounts to is once I've profiled jobs, new jobs get profiled the same way. They get compared, whatever. Once they're profiled, I can actually build the configurations on the fly, almost, to generate the files that will normalize these jobs so they'll run on your workflow, whatever it happens to be. Does that make sense? The second component is called an onboarder at this point in time. And the onboarder is a runtime component that it basically takes the job. You build the configuration file so you can run the job on the fly out of a database. Does this make sense? I see some looks of incredulity on some of the faces back there. Because typically, to make something like this happen, it's one-to-one or one to a few. It's scripting. It takes a lot of time. We have this going at 4 different types of organizations right now. A large national insurance company, 46 lines of business, 5 document composition systems, and they successfully outsourced all the print fulfillment to a very large print service provider. We have this running at a state government where every job that they get comes in, and it takes them a half an hour or less to onboard a brand new job that they've never seen from a department. The print service provider that I mentioned earlier is in the early stages of implementing this type of approach. The bottom line is if you're intelligent about the questions you ask, you have an easy way with a NoSQL database, a couch database, that allows you to store things as XML. You have the ability at runtime to build things on the fly that represent the templates that will force these jobs to work in your generic workflow. Now, you have to understand the back end of what your business is. You have to understand your printers. You have to understand what your inserters and your slitters and your cutters, the control files that run those. You have to understand if you've standardized your workflow in a number 10 window envelope and the address block has to be here, you have to understand that. And when you build out this generic template, if you will, when you're capturing data about where the address blocks are, you'll automatically move that object around on the page so it will fit in that envelope. There are so many things that could potentially impact your generic workflow, your standardized workflow. If you can understand what your standardized workflow is, I submit to you that you can actually use automation to take the burden away from onboarding jobs. So let's dive in a little bit more. We've got the old flow diagram that's automated here. So you take files from the outside, wherever they happen to be. Your client sends you PDF files, pretty typical in a print service provider environment. You've got your document composition from this line of business that's feeding you AFP, even though you have Xerox printers. So what do? In our world, you do a profile, right? You have this guided tool that lets you extract and identify all the content objects and the metadata around that in your file. It's going to automatically identify some things for you if you have all, yes?
The profile, are you going to run that guy every time a file comes in, or do you only run it the first time you get a new file?
Well, it depends on how many different types of files you're getting. So in the example I'm going to tell you about earlier, they had 2,600 jobs coming out of 5 different document composition environments in various formats. So they actually ran it a number of times, but they didn't run it 2,600 times.
Yeah, the trick was is that, you know, if they say, oh, we didn't change the file, and then you try to print the thing,
It doesn't print. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So you run it when you need to. Basically, you try the new file that you've received against what's in the database. And if it doesn't, you know, if it's not going to run, then you run the profiler. That's the beauty of it. So the parameters are stored in this NoSQL couch database. You know, it's connected via a RESTful API to basically your production workflow and environment. And the idea is you want to normalize and optimize this print file that you've received to run in your environment. You standardize your back end. You force all of the jobs that you're receiving in an automated fashion into a format that is optimized for your workflow. Does this make sense? Awesome. Okay. Let's look at the profiler for a second. All right. I mentioned that it has a database. Basically, it's a NoSQL database, so it's easy to add new columns, new parameters. And what you're doing in there is you're extracting all this information and metadata, and you're putting it in the database. And when it comes time to run the job, you're actually taking this database and assembling your template that represents what's required to run the job. So it's normalized and optimized for your back-end workflow. I'm thinking primarily going from a print-ready file, but in the PSP environment, example I gave you earlier, they were using Quadient as their document composition environment, you know, whatever document composition environment you're using, or if you're using multiple, whatever. Once you create a print-ready file, then you normalize it. So, no, I mean, you could certainly extend it that way. Most of your document composition environments have some sort of version control for templates. But how many times have you made changes on a post-comp level because it's such a pain in the rear end to change it upstream, which is fairly common. And a lot of print service providers get that. They don't have the ability to go back to the source and say, hey, can you change this upstream? They can only change it in their shops. So basically, you're doing a lot of document reengineering, manipulation, and things like that to optimize, right? And you end up in this database as giving you a record. It's one source of really for all the document reengineering you're doing. So ideally, you're saving some effort, you know, and if you've got a bunch of locations, and we do business with PSPs that have 8, 10, 12 locations, this gives them an opportunity to have some centralized control. and to ensure that they've optimized or can optimize the print streams to run in their workflows. So, normalized for a generic workflow. Not much of a tagline, but that's probably the best way to describe what we're doing. So, I promised you an implant use case, and this is one. It's a big use case. It was 2,600 jobs. They had 4 print centers. They had 46 lines of business. And the goal was, senior management wanted to get out of the print business. So they were closing 4 print shops, consolidating from 4 to 1. They wanted to still control their IP. They wanted to continue to do document composition, back to what you were talking about earlier, Kemal, about, do I do it myself? Do I hand it to a managed print service provider? Do I let my print service provider do it all? They weren't going to let their print service provider do it all, do the composition internally. They wanted to maintain that control themselves. Great. Doesn't change the fact that they've got 46 lines of business, 2,600 jobs, plus that they had to convert and condition to run at the PSP. All right, they got everything. They had PCL, they had PostScript, they had some PDF, they had some AFP in their environment. Their print service provider ran primarily Ricoh printers. High-speed Ricoh inkjet printers. AFP is what it wants to eat. So first off, they had to create a scenario where they could convert all that stuff in the front end to AFP. Then they had to insert all the TLEs, the tagged logical elements, the metadata that the print service provider was going to use to do all the job accounting to report back to them what they produced. A big job. Really, really, really big job. In fact, it was such a big job that everybody involved in it, print service provider, us, Canon, because they had their own internal ADF environment that was outsourced to Canon services. Everyone agreed it was going to take 950 days. Problem was they only had 6 months to do it in. Is that pretty typical? I think it's pretty typical. I've seen it a lot, okay? So, basically, they bought some stuff to help them transform the data formats to AFP. Like I said, this is pretty much a Prisma workflow at the time. They're going to their print service provider who's running high-speed Ricoh presses, inkjet presses, and they're doing all the fulfillment, all right? Now, the SLA, just for fun, so you know it was serious, as soon as the data hit the print service provider, they had 24 hours to do all the printing, all the finishing, and get it in the mail. And there was another step that we helped them with, which was to do automated document integrity quality assurance. So literally, what was generated by the composition systems was a source file. What came out of their own internal ADF was a source file. Those were compared to make sure the data hadn't changed, even though barcodes had been added, things like that. It was sent to the print service provider. They would do their thing. They would send the file back. And they would do it, we would do an automatic compare of the data and the formatting to ensure that what they were sending to the customer was actually what was composed to start with. So that was an added thing for this 24-hour turnaround. Okay. So, to get the price they wanted in terms of print and the guarantee that they were going to be able to fulfill against that 24-hour SLA, and the fact that this insurance company had the ability to give them a standard format, yeah. I think there were actually 42 TLEs that were inserted into those files to get all the job accounting stuff. And it was a mess. I will tell you, there were big groups, big powwows all the time, you know, and there were some pretty panicked people, way high, wondering whether they could pull it off or not. It was pretty cool that we all did. So, pardon me? Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the good news is, is we figured out a process to do this. And the only process that made sense was to automate as much as possible using what was the precursor of really of smart setup for us as the way of going forward. We needed automation. Now the interesting thing is, of the 2,600 jobs, they were only had like 19 real formats, 19 variations that were significant. All the other ones were just optional branches, you know, little variations here and there. But when you're capturing that stuff in a database, guess what? It's evident. So the bottom line is this was completed, this conversion of 2,600 jobs. Basically, the AFP manipulated, normalized so it would run the print service provider's back end. Took 40 days. It took 40 days. Everyone was flabbergasted. Absolutely flabbergasted.
You took the other 900 days off.
Believe you me, there were other fish to fry in that shop. And you know who these guys are. Yeah, you know exactly who they are. Huh? Yeah.
So, as a profiler, what kind of reporting back to your dashboard that supervises kind of reporting back how things are running and performance and status?
Not really. Not when we build it for these guys. You know, the thing of it is Smart Profiler is part of our, you know, overall print center management platform solution, and so it wires into the dashboard because it can certainly report as to what's going on. Now, what's counterintuitive for these guys, and it's the last thing I'm going to say about it, is with so many jobs, there were a bunch of configuration files, INI files, and INI files, and ICF files in the Crawford world. It was like 8,000 or 10,000. And management decided, we don't want to manage all those. I don't want to have to go through all that stuff. If a change happens, the beauty of the profiler database is they throw them away and they rebuild them. The file comes in, they recognize from the data in the file what the job is. They build the configuration files out of what's in the profiler database and they run them. Now, for people who are concerned about version control and stuff like that, you're probably going, I'm having a heart attack. You know, we need to keep that stuff for perpetuity, in perpetuity. That's fine. But in terms of this particular operation, they didn't want to waste the time or effort to maintain all those jobs if they didn't have to. Whenever a job was run, if it was a quarterly job, whatever, they would build the job configurations on the fly out of the profiler database and run them. If it's a daily job that runs multiple times a day, it doesn't really matter. They've got the one source of the truth that represents all the variations of the jobs that they run. If they get a new one, they run it against the profiler. They figure out the other stuff through the guided parameterization, if you will, to figure out what the new stuff is. And they roll. Not a lot. Not a lot. I mean, we're just talking, you know, some Linux servers and a couch database. So, one thing that we have found is that the solution itself is most effective if you have some document reengineering solution from somebody to normalize all the print production files. So you've got Compart, if you've got Rico, if you've got Crawford.
Do that stuff?
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. So, what do you want to do? You want to standardize all your output formats, your PDLs. You want to standardize on the same barcodes. You want to do as much as you can to create a generic backend, a generic workflow for each set of printers that you've got. Also, you know what your finishing equipment is. You know what the control files are that are required to make this stuff hum. Standardize on those. And make sure your salespeople understand what those parameters are as well. That would be very helpful. That would be extremely helpful. The other thing that we figured out is that if you have a complete end-to-end workflow solution that serves as the integration bus for all the different systems that run your workflows, that collect information about what happens and when according to a workflow, that provides a level of automation and a level of orchestration and dashboards and visibility, you can really make this sing. And again, it doesn't matter. You can have RPD, you can have Cephas, you can have Rackham, you can have ProConductor from Crawford Technologies. The bottom line is, if you want to know what's going on, you want to build a generic workflow, standardized workflow. You want to be able to integrate all the disparate systems, point solutions that represent your shop, your workflow. An end-to-end backend is almost a requirement. To your question earlier, you have dashboards. Do we really need another dashboard on top of the dashboards? You know, a lot of people want one dashboard to rule them all. They want to give views off that dashboard to their friends. So, I think I'm done. Questions?